I'm going to ask all of you to bear with me because this is my first attempt at an actual video essay, but it has been something I've wanted to examine for a while, and I feel like if I did it in written format, I wouldn't be able to go through and edit and cut unnecessary stuff. This project has helped me kind of figure out how to get rid of unnecessary information, what to cut, when I'm going on a rant or a tangent or anything like that. It's also taught me to try and speak more concisely. The Jane Eyre video was my first attempt at this format, but it wasn't my first attempt at trying to create an argument and then back it up. It was essentially me just going through a bunch of adaptations and talking about what I liked about it or what was strange about it, but there really was no backbone to it, and it wasn't scripted, and it sounded rather rambly, just like this is sounding, because this is the one part of the video that isn't scripted. So I'm asking you to bear with me, watch it, see what you think. I've been a fan of video essayists for a long time, all the way back to the days of, like, Nostalgia Chick and stuff, and recent events have made me revisit that format, so we're giving it a shot, so bear with me. It's no secret that I was a major BBC Sherlock fan all throughout high school. I wrote songs about it, read the theories, waded through years-long hiatuses, and even consumed, and at one time tried my hand at writing, fanfiction. We don't discuss the last part. After Season 4, at the beginning of 2017, I think it's safe to say that the fandom has calmed a bit, or at least is pretty close to calming down. Some wounds have taken longer to heal. There have been many video essays, think pieces, and ridiculously long Tumblr posts about why writers Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss would make something this bad. A lot of focus is on the filmmaking, the plot, the writing, a secret conspiracy to make fun of fans who ship the leads. I'm not a film critic. I am not even a film student. I can't even say that I am someone who knows the Holmes canon inside and out. But I can't speak to the quality of the last season on those terms. But I can, however, speak as a fan, and now feels the magic is gone, and wants to know why it affected me in that way. I want to examine my love for Holmes, and exactly what this show did to make me so uncomfortable with him now. My love affair with Mr. Holmes actually began before high school, with a book called Down the Rabbit Hole. In my 7th grade English class, we were all put into book clubs for a semester, and I received the book Down the Rabbit Hole by Peter Abrahams. This was a part of a larger series called the Echo Falls series, following a middle school girl named Ingrid solving mysteries in her town of Echo Falls. One of the things that drew me to this book was, one, the girl's interest in theater, as she was in a production of Alice in Wonderland, and the fact that the book began with her getting her braces tightened. This girl's idol was, interestingly, Sherlock Holmes. She kept a treasury of the stories on her bedside table, and soon after, I bought my own. Also around this time, the second Guy Ritchie adaptation had come into theaters, and my father had been a fan of the movies. He also encouraged my interest by downloading the old radio episodes to my iPod Nano. This was my main introduction to the original canon, as the stories were a little challenging for me. Then came good old PBS.
Is that a British Army Browning L9A1 in your pocket? Or are you just pleased to see me?
Both.
I knew of Sherlock vaguely through seeing it in passing on Netflix and never clicking on it. In 2012 or so, I saw the second season was coming out and suggested my dad and I watch it together. So we did. We watched the season 2 premiere. I'm not sure why 14-year-old me would think this was a good idea, but up until that point, I had been watching kids shows that really had no through line or required me to follow any kind of particular plot. This was also my first introduction to the phenomenon that would be Benedict Cumberbatch. Recently, there was a Tumblr post circulating about everyone's first reaction to seeing Cumberbatch in something for the first time, and my contribution was along the lines of, I thought his face didn't match his voice, and considering how much he looked like a lanky teenager in the early seasons, it was unsettling. To be honest, I thought he played a good Holmes at the beginning of my obsession with the show. He was my favorite version at the time. Now he's shifted down a few spots, but I will get to that later. He played a socially stunted, high-functioning genius.
I'm a high-functioning sociopath. Do your research.
He had an extremely focused Holmes, but also a bit manic.
That was this morning. When's the next one?
Despite certain things, I don't think he was ever the problem. He's a talented actor, and he did good work with what he was given, as did his co-star Martin Freeman. The thing that drew me to this adaptation in particular, I think, is because it was modern. I know the gimmick that made it marketable is the reason why I liked it, I know. But to be honest, it helped me where I had trouble with the stories. It was like a form of shorthand. The fact that I had trouble getting through the stories, I think plays into what made me squirm about the 4th season. I've never been great at reading the Victorian style of writing, even as a 20-year-old. I still struggle to read books that are known as classics. If you've seen my Jane Eyre video, that was the exception. The radio shows from the 30s and 40s that I downloaded for free through Apple Podcasts were really the only education on the Holmes canon that I had. Hound of the Baskerville being my favorite, as it was truly terrifying and I felt real tension and suspense. Also, hearing a howl through the crackle of 1930s quality radio is one of the eeriest things I've ever heard. BBC Sherlock's version of Hound is probably still my favorite episode, mostly because I know the story the best and you finally see a crack in Holmes's intellect.
Henry's right.
What?
I saw it, too.
What?
I saw it, too, John.
Just a minute. You saw what?
A hound.
This is something I think a lot of fans like to see, especially fan fiction writers who would craft entire narratives around Sherlock becoming a more emotional being. It was pretty rare that I would read a fic that ever really revolved around a case or Sherlock's deductive skills. Speaking of his skills, another video essay called Sherlock is Garbage and Here's Why recently described BBC Sherlock's deductive skills as superpowers, usually referring to the fact that in some instances, Sherlock just seems to magically pick up on things that no human, no matter how intelligent, would ever be able to pick up on. Sherlock, in one instance, even goes so far to claim that he can predict movements of others, no matter how random. This is where my disdain for this new season really started to make sense. As I said, I had issues reading the books as a kid, and even as an adult, in the Holmesian community, the canon is highly regarded, so it can be understood that since I wasn't as learned in the canon as everybody else, you can't help but feeling a bit like a fake fan. It also made me believe that I was possibly too stupid to read them. There were many moments in the first few seasons of BBC Sherlock, and especially in the later seasons, that I felt like I had missed something. We always managed to get to a happy ending. Well, except Reichenbach. But I was always sitting there rejoicing in their victory like, but wait, how did we get here? Later into my obsession, I bought a book that was a tie-in to the series that was essentially a scrapbook that Martin Freeman's Watson put together of case notes and artifacts from the cases of seasons 1 and 2. It actually helped me understand a little bit what was happening in the episodes. I was able to absorb the info at my own speed. But the fact that I needed it at all perpetuated the fake fan insecurities in my head. I was also reading a lot of fan fiction at the time, which leads to a side note. I'm not going to spend too much time on the John Locke conspiracy, mostly because it's not really the number one reason that made me shy away from the show, but it definitely led me to questioning my integrity of even being a fan of the show. For those of you who don't know, the John Locke conspiracy was a theory that everything that was put into BBC Sherlock was secretly coded to hint that Sherlock and John were gay, and that a relationship for them was endgame, and the entire reason why the show was created in the first place. And for some particular reason, those who believed in this were super sure it was going to happen in season 4. There were meta posts, fan art, watch parties, theories, even an entire YouTube channel of video essays devoted to proving that even through film and media language that this was for sure the only endgame. I will be honest and say that I read a lot of the posts, and I did pretty much watch every single video on the TJLC YouTube channel. I didn't believe that it would happen, but if it did happen, I didn't see it as a negative step. But I stayed pretty skeptical, and I didn't think they owed us anything. Plus, it was kind of fun to be part of brainstorming and coming up with theories and ideas of where this show might go. And I will admit that the YouTube videos on the YouTube channel taught me a lot about film language and still kind of helped me figure out meanings behind certain symbols in film today. When the infamous I Love You trailer came out, I believed for like a second, but based on the setting and what was happening in the scene, I quickly returned to skepticism. The internet did not. Basically, every blog on my dashboard was filled with theories and picked apart the trailer and screenshots and basically trying to point that every possible little detail in this trailer pointed towards John Locke. Then when the 4th season premiered and they obviously didn't get together, people practically rioted. There were death threats, people crying homophobia, claiming that this entire time they were being queer-baited and laughed at behind closed doors. After this outburst, let's just say I cleared out a lot of blogs on my Tumblr. I bring up the John Lockers because I did read a lot of fan fiction in my day, and it started to cloud my view of the product a little bit. So much that I didn't notice when the characters changed entirely. Season 3 of Sherlock was pretty well liked by fans, especially John Lockers. You had Sherlock leaving John's wedding, looking all sad. You had him teaching him to dance, granted off screen. You had Sherlock making origami because separation anxiety. This season was pretty well loved because Sherlock's character morphed into the emotionally deprived, sad puppy that a lot of fan fiction depicts him to be. In a lot of the fics, or at least the ones I was exposed to, Sherlock was always the one rather inexperienced when it came to relationships, specifically romantic ones, and John was the one to always teach him and give him the love that he was deprived of as a child. In early seasons, this kind of reading would never occur to me. He seemed like a guy who knew what he wants, and he really doesn't see relationships as a priority. However, in meeting John, he does see some use in a friendship. They just work well together, and because John seems to affect his process and way of life in a positive and useful way, Sherlock is willing to let this person in, and in the process does learn the importance of relationships. But I never saw it as deprivation. Sure, I suppose you could argue that he's adopted this idea because he was deprived, but I don't read it that way.
Well, caring about them helps save them.
Nope.
Then I'll continue not to make that mistake.
In later seasons, I was pretty open to this emotional Sherlock because I'd been living in the world of the fanon, not the actual content of the show. So this was normal to me. Only later did I realize that it wasn't cohesive after the shipper goggles came off. Season 4 came out, and I remember being confused. Constantly. I haven't seen the episode The Six Thatchers literally since January of 2017. I honestly hated it. I watched it with another pretty devout fan, and we both assumed it had to be part of some larger plan, and that's why it was confusing. We were wrong. The second episode, The Lying Detective, was probably the best one out of the season, but compared to the rest of the show, is pretty bad. I liked it for personal reasons, mostly involving the character of Faith, but I won't discuss that here. My biggest issue with this particular episode is the sort of abandonment of any kind of logic. He's tracking a serial killer who's admitted to being one, but then continues to pursue him, all while being high the entire time. You're not sure if you're supposed to be following the case or his personal issues, and John Watson is being completely unreasonable about his wife's death. Just... what?
He's entitled. I killed his wife.
Yes, you did.
He has some misdirected anger towards Sherlock that is never addressed again nor apologized for, but let's look at the case again. This season has a habit of starting the episode one way, but deciding to focus on something else halfway through. Kind of like how on Family Guy, in some episodes, it usually begins with Peter's antics, but you know it's meant to lead to what's really going to happen later and where the focus will be story-wise. This makes for a confused audience. And as someone who already had a hard time keeping track of all the facts in previous seasons, this made things worse for me. Which is why I come to believe that the reason for the discomfort I have with the series, now that I can see it objectively, is I wasn't stupid. The show was. Please don't hurt me. Mystery stories have one thing in common usually towards the end. There is always a moment where the detective character explains how they came to their conclusion, and if it's done well, this is usually backed up by things that you could go back to and find in the book. There's always a satisfying moment of, oh, of course, how did I not see that before? There's really no feeling like that in BBC Sherlock. When Sherlock explains his methods, if he explains them, yes, there are things that you could probably refer back to and have picked up, but only if you were in the room with them, observing the same things in real life, in real time. There is no way for the audience to follow along with this logic, because we find out information only when it's told to us, which can leave us feeling stupid. I'm not going to lie, I will occasionally get that feeling from the writers as well. They've been known to lie and tease fans and create a feeling that we couldn't possibly understand what they're crafting because we're not on their level. The thing that made this idea solidify for me was a little show called Elementary. I watched Elementary since it came out in 2012. I've always liked it. I've never really subscribed to the rivalry it had with BBC Sherlock. It had a different premise. Sherlock was in New York with a female Watson who's treated more like a protege than a sidekick, and even gets to be just as good as Holmes. But I never fully appreciated it. Being a police procedural, it has a clear plot with clues and red herrings that you can follow. My dad and I usually play Guess the Killer when watching it. The Holmes is intelligent, quirky, mildly arrogant, but not a gatekeeper to his methods like Sherlock.
Get out, I need to go to my mind palace.
He's also willing to adjust when he's wrong, and he's a flawed human being. His addiction is addressed as a major plot point and integral to the character rather than used for drama and or comedic relief, as it is in BBC's version. He's capable of change, and you see it happen because of the people in his life and his experiences. He doesn't just become whatever the writers need him to be from moment to moment. I don't recall Sherlock ever being a full-on action star. Make your characters human, trust your audience, and to the fans, when you love something, it doesn't mean you own it. These writers don't owe you anything other than good content.